Hi, welcome to the video Spring Security JWT Authentication with me, Nam Haming from CodeJava.net. In this video, you'll learn how to secure REST APIs with Spring Security and JSON Web Token or JWT in detail. I'll help you understand overview of JWT or JWT, understand Spring Security filters chain, and how to code a Spring Boot application that exposes some REST APIs that are secure by JWT, and how to test the protected APIs with curl in command line. So by the end of this tutorial, you'll be able to understand why JWT is widely used to secure REST APIs and master the coding techniques for implementing JWT with Spring Security. I'll guide you how to develop a public API that authenticates users. For example, a client sends a request that includes username and password to the Authentication API. If the authentication is unsuccessful, then the API generates an access token, which is attached to the response. The access token here is a JSON Web Token. And then to invoke a protected API, the client must put the access token along with the request. And if the token is verified, the API returns a response normally as the client were authenticated. And to demo Spring Security JWT Authentication, we'll develop a Java project based on the following technologies: Spring Web, Spring Data JPA with Hibernate, Spring Security, Spring Validation, Java library, JWT, MySQL JDBC driver. And in this video, I'm using the following software programs: Java Development Kit, Spring Tool Suite, MySQL Community Server, and MySQL Workbench, and curl program for testing the REST APIs in command line. Okay, let's understand briefly about JSON Web Token or JWT or JWT. JWT is an open standard that defines a compact and self-contained way for securely transmitting information between parties as a JSON object. What really makes JWT widely used are compact. JWT is just a string, so it can be used easily in HTTP authorization headers and URI query parameters. And trustworthy, JWT is digitally signed using a secret key or public-private RSA key pair. That means JWT tokens can be verified and cannot be tampered with. Simply put, a JWT is a string representing a set of claims as a JSON object. A claim is a piece of information asserted about a subject, represented as a name-value pair, claim name and claim value. And the structure of a JSON Web Token consists of three parts: header, payload, and signature, separated by dots. And the header specifies the cryptographic algorithm applied to the claim sets in the token. Here's an example. The type is JWT and the algorithm is HS256. And the payload contains the claim sets in terms of name-value pairs. Here's an example. The claim names are sub or subject, name is or issuer, and the signature is calculated using the header and the payload. It takes the cryptographic algorithm specified in the header, for example, HMark SHA-256 here, with a secret key to digitally sign the information, which is basically for URL encoded header plus a dot and plus basically for URL encoded payload, and the result is a string like this. You see, so you see a JSON Web Token is just a string having three parts: header, payload, and signature, separated by dots. And note that the signature ensures that the token has not been tampered with. And it's also important to understand how Spring Security works at a glance to know how to implement JWT authentication with Spring Security. When a client sends a request to the server, the request will go through a sequence of filters before reaching the destination servlet, which is actually responsible for handling the request. And the Spring Web Framework plugs in a special filter called filter chain proxy that picks a set of internal filters depending on the application's security configuration, like this, you see. And each filter in the Spring Security filters chain is responsible for applying a specific security concern to the current request. So having said that, we need to insert our custom filter, for example, JWT token filter here. This filter will check for the availability and verify the integrity of the access token in the request. If the token is verified, then the request is passed through the downstream filters and finally reaching the destination sublet. Make sense? Now let's create and set up a Java project. You see, I'm using Spring Tool Suite IDE. So I create a new Spring Starter project here and enter the project name as Spring JWT Authentication, and the type is Maven Java version 11, and description demo Spring security dot authentication. Next, and I choose the Spring Boot version 2.5.12, and for the dependencies we need to choose Spring Data JPA, MySQL JDBC driver, Spring Web, Spring Boot DevTools, and Spring Security here. And we also need to use Spring validation. Okay, click Finish. Okay, the project got created. You see here, and open the pom.xml file. Okay, you see the dependencies here, and in order to use Java JWT library, we need to specify another dependency. We don't need to use Spring Security Test, so delete this dependency. We just need to use the Spring Boot Starter test and specify the dependency for Java JWT library like this. Group ID is io.json web token, and artifact ID is jjwt, and version number is 0.9.1. Okay, and then we need to declare some properties for data source in the application.properties file here, because in this project we'll use MySQL database with Spring Data JPA and Hibernate framework. So we need to specify the data source properties here. The first property is the JDBC URL, spring.datasource.url, which is JDBC MySQL // is localhost 3306 / and then the database schema name products.db. So in MySQL Workbench, we need to create a new database schema with the name products.db here, products.db. Okay, apply to create a new database schema. Okay, and set the default schema is products.db here. Okay, you see no tables now. And then we need to specify the username and password to access the database. And we also need to set some properties, for example, spring.jpa.hibernate.ddr auto equal update. So the application will create the tables on startup. Okay, and then we also need to specify some Hibernate properties. Spring.jpa show SQL equal to show SQL statements in the console, and Spring.jpa dot properties dot hibernate dot format underscore SQL to briefify the SQL statements in the console, and then we specify the database dialect class for MySQL database like this. Dialect equal os dot hibernate dot dialect dot MySQL 8 dialect. Okay, so these are the properties for data source. Next, let's implement a couple of product APIs, which are the main business of the application. With the URI is slash products. The first API requires HTTP post request for creating a new product, and the second API that requires HTTP GET request is for listing products. So we need to code the product entity class, the product repository interface that extends the JPA repository interface, and code the product API class, which is a REST controller. Okay, come back to the project, and let's create a new Java package first here. net.code java product API. Okay, and new Java class, the entity class product. Okay, and in this entity class, we have three fields: ID, name, and price. And we use some JPA annotations to map this Java class with a table in the database. So we use the entity annotation. Let me check. We need to have Spring Data JPA here. Okay. Entity from javax.persistent package and table annotation to specify the table name is products. And for the ID field, I need to use the ID annotation and generated value with the strategy. Strategy is identity. And for validation, for validation for the name field. For the name field here, I use the column annotation and specify nullable equal false, and the length of the column is 128 characters. And for validation, we can use the length annotation, which comes from Hibernate validator contains here, and specify the minimum length is about 5 characters and maximum length is 128 characters. Okay, and then generate getters and setters for all the fields. Okay, and then let's code a new repository interface for product here. New interface product repository, and it extends the JPA repository with the type is product, and the type of the ID column is integer. Okay, very simple. And then code the REST controller for implementing the API. product API. So we use the REST controller annotation. Okay, and we need to have a reference of the product repository report and the API that returns a list of products. So we specify the request mapping URI is / products here, and the first API handler method get mapping public list of product list, and we simply return repo file O. So this is a very simple API that returns a list of products. Okay, so far so good. Now let's start the application. So it will create the table products in the database. For now, you see in MySQL Workbench, the database is empty. Now let me start the application. We got an error. URL must start with JDBC. Let me check JDBC here. Okay, start again. Okay, you see the application started successfully, and you can see in the console it executed a SQL statement for creating a new table products here with the columns ID, name, price. Okay, so far so good. Okay, and now let me test the first API here to list products. So I open a new command prompt here and use the curl command localhost port number 8080 and / products, and I specify the flag -v to see the verbose output. You see I got the HTTP status 401, meaning that I don't have permission to access the API / products because you see the error message is unauthorized here. Because by default, when Spring Security is present in the class path of the project, it protects all the requests. In other words, it requires authentication for all the incoming requests. So we need to specify some security configuration here. For now, we enable public access to the API. So let's create a new Spring configuration class application security config. Okay, and we have this class extends the web security configurer adapter. Okay, and then we need to use the annotation enable web security for this class. Okay, and we need to override the method configure HTTP security here to enable public access to all the requests. Okay, so we call the HTTP authorized request any request permit all. And we also need to disable CSRF. So we call http.csrf.disable. And you can see in the response here, you can see the line set cookie JSON ID. That means it is still using a session based. So we should disable session or use state list for the application. So we set session state list like this: HTTP session management, session creation policy, and specify the session creation policy is state list. Okay, so this is the initial configuration for security of the application, allowing public access for all the incoming requests. Okay, now let me test the API again. And you see, now I got the response HTTP 200, meaning that the request has been handled by the API endpoint, and the response is an empty array here because in the database no products. Okay, let me check in MySQL Workbench here. Okay, let me refresh the database, and you can see the products table got created here with columns ID, name, and price. And now the table is empty, no rows, you see. So that's why the API call returns an empty array here. Okay, so far so good. And next, let's implement the second product API that allows the REST client to create a new product, insert product information in the database. So update the product API controller class here, the second API endpoint with the post mapping annotation. Public response entity of type product create. Okay, and the parameter is product object, and to buy JSON data from the client to a Java object, we need to use the request body annotation. And to validate the values of the fields of the product object here, we need to use valid annotation here, which comes from javax.validation. Okay, and in the body of the method, we simply call repo save product, and it returns a product object save product. Okay, and for the creation operation, we should return the HTTP status 201 created, and we need to specify an URI for the product like this. URI product URI of the newly created product URI create, for example, like this slash products slash and followed by the product ID saved product get ID. Okay, and then we return response entity, the status created with the product URI, and for the body of the response, we pass the product object saved product here. Okay, that's it. Very simple, right? Okay, so far so good. And now we can test the create product API using curl in command line. Okay, so let me type the command curl -v -h to specify the content type of the request. Content type is application/JSON, and D to specify the JSON data. Name of the product, For example, iPhone 13 Pro, and the price of the product price 999. Okay, and then the URL localhost products, enter. You see, I got the HTTP response status 201 created, and you can see the URI of the newly created product is in the location header slash products slash one, and you see the body of the response is the JSON document representing the product information. Here you see ID 1, name iPhone 13 Pro, price 999. That means the correct product API is working perfectly. Let me check in MySQL Workbench. You see a new row inserted here. iPhone 13 Pro 999 here. Okay, let me test again. Now, this time I enter the product name is very short. Okay, so we should got another or different HTTP status. Okay, you see we got error, lot of error message with the status is 400, meaning that uh, bad request. Here you see bad request because the length of the product must be between 5 and 128 characters as specified by the length annotation here. That's why we need to use the Spring validation dependency for the project. Here you see Spring starter validation here. Okay, now let me test to insert second product. Second product is Amazon Kindle Fire. Price is 129. Okay, done. As you can see, the response 201 URI slash product slash 2 and JSON response here. Okay, let me check in the database. We have 2 rows here. Now let me test the correct product API another time to insert the third product into the database. Surface Pro, price 678, and went to format JSON response. Okay, you see. Now I can see the body of the response is a prettified JSON document here. Very nice, right? Okay, so now I can test the list products API. Localhost 8080 products JSON. Okay, you see, now I got an array that contains 3 products here. You see ID1, ID2, ID3. Next, let's update the user entity class, user repository interface, and update the application security config class in preparation for implementing the Authentication API. Okay, so let's create a new Java package here. New package net.code.java.user and create a new entity class user, and we have 3 fields in this user entity class: ID, email, and password. And we need to use some JPA annotations to map these Java class with a table in the database. So we use the entity annotation and table and specify the mapping table in database is users. Okay, and I copy this annotations ID and generated value. Okay, and for the email field here, use the column annotation nullable false unique equal to, and the maximum length is 50 characters. Okay, and then for the password field, it maps to the password column in the database, and the maximum length is 64 characters, so it can store encoded password. Okay, and then the red dust and set dust for all the fields. Okay, and the red constructor using fields email and password, and a no argument constructor that is required by Hibernate. Okay, and then code the user repository interface, user repository, and extend the JPA repository interface. Okay, and specify the entity type is user. Type of ID field is integer. Finish. Okay. Let me check the console here. And you see it automatically creates the table users here, ID, email, password. Let me check in MySQL Workbench. Refresh the database schema. And you see the table user got created automatically here. Now select rows, and currently it is empty. And then let's code a test class for creating a new user. So under the test package here, delete the test class generated when the project is being created. Delete, and I create a new test class here under the package net.codejava.user. Test class name is user repository test. Okay, and use the annotations data JPA test, and auto configure test database displays equal none to run the test against the real database, and rollback false to commit the data to the database. Okay, and we need to auto-write an instance of the user repository interface here. Repo and the test method test create user. Okay, and because the user password should be encoded in the database, so here I use password encoder of type bcrypt password encoder. Okay, create a new user object, new user equal new user, email and password. Email, for example, name@codejava.net, and an encoded password string raw password is now 2020 and encoded password equal password encoder encode raw password and set the encoded password here. Okay, and then call repo save a new user. It now returns a persistent user object saved user, and I assert that saved user is not now, and also assert that saved user get user ID is greater than 0 is greater than 0. Okay, and run this test method to insert a new user into the users table in the database. Now run this test create user method run as JUnit test. Okay, you see the test is successful. Insert into users table here. Let me check in database. Okay, you see, so we got a new user inserted into the users table. Here you see the value in the password field is encoded here. And next, we need to update the user repository interface, update user entity class, and update the application security config class in order to use database authentication with Spring Data JPA. Okay, so let's update the user repository interface here. Declare a method like this. Option of type user and find by email. String email. Okay, and then update the user entity class here to implement the user details interface here, and add an implemented method here. For this get authorities just return now, get username return email, and for this card method return true. Okay, and then let's update the application security config class here. We need to declare a password encoder bin here. Bin public password encoder, and we return a new instance of the bcrypt password encoder. Okay, and then we need to override another configure method with the parameter is authentication manager builder here. Okay, and then write the code in this method like this. Auth dot user detail service, and here we use lambda expression user name. We need to have an instance of user repository here. User repository, user repo. and here user report file by email and username. Or else we throw an exception if no user file with the given username or email. We also use a lambda expression here, new username not found exception. Okay, the message is user plus username not found. Okay, very simple. And then we'll also need to expose bin of time authentication manager here, like this. Let me check override implement method authentication manager bin here. Okay, and we need to expose as a bin here. Okay, so that's for the configuration required to use database authentication with Spring Data JPA. And next, I'm going to guide you how to implement the Authentication API or user login API with the URI is /auth/login. And to use the API, the client must send a request that includes auth request object containing email and password like this. And if the authentication is successful, return the response that includes the auth response object containing email and access token. The access token is actually a JWT, a JSON web token. Else, if the authentication failed, return HTTP status for one unauthorized. So in Java code, we need to create the auth request class, auth response, and auth API. Okay, come back to the project and create a new Java package here. net.codejava.user.api. Okay, and create a new Java class auth request that represent an authentication request. It has 3 fields: email and password. And generate letters and setters, and also constructor. We don't need to generate constructor. Okay, and then we need to use some annotations for validating the values of email and password here. Okay, so here we use the email annotation and length annotation. Specifies the minimum length is 5 characters and maximum is 50 characters. And also use the length annotation for the password field. With minimum length is 5 characters and maximum length of a password is 10 characters. Okay. And next, let's create the auth response class. Auth response that represents the authentication response of the authentication API, and it has 3 fields: email and access token. And generate getters and setters, and generate constructor using fields. Constructor using fields here. And also we need to generate no argument constructor. Okay. And then we code the Authentication API class, new Java class of API. This should be a REST controller. And in this class, we need to use the Authentication Manager as it is exposed in the application security config here. Authentication Manager bin here. Okay, so we have AutoWire Authentication Manager of Manager, and the API handler method post mapping. The URI is /auth/login public response entity login. Let's return now for now. And the parameter of the login method is an object of type auth request and we need to use the request body annotation to convert JSON sent from the client as to a Java object, and to validate the values of the field we need to use the valid annotation from Java's validation. Okay, and then we try catch, have a try catch block here. Now we need to call auth manager here, authenticate, and it returns an authentication object here, authentication. Okay, and here we use lambda expression like this, new username and password authentication token. Let me check username password authentication token here, and we need to pass the username and password in the request get email request get password. Okay, and we need to catch the bad credentials exception if the authentication failed. In case the authentication failed, we return the HTTP status for one unauthorized. So we return response entity status, HTTP status unauthorized here, and build the response. Okay, in case the authentication successful, we return an auth response object. Before that, we get the user object, user equal user from the authentication result object here, get principal. Okay, we need to import the user class. Okay, and then create a new auth response object, response equal new auth response, and passing the username, email, user get email. And for the access token, now I use simple text, and later I will show you how to generate the access token. String access token equal JWT access token here. So for early testing, I just use this text. Okay, and then we return response entity with OK status and OK status, and the body is response auth or response object. Okay. So far so good. Now we can test this authentication API for the first time. Clear the command prompt and type curl dash v dash h content type is application / JSON, and then specify a JSON object that represents the auth request object with the field email. Now I used text which is not an email, and password field. Password. Also, I used an arbitrary password. So it should fail. The authentication should be failed. Okay, and then the URL localhost auth login. Sorry, I forgot / here. Okay, you see now I got the error. You see I got the error response with the HTTP status 400 but request here, meaning that the request is not correct because I specify the value for email field which is not actually an email. Okay, you see here rejected value, the value of the email here, code email. So you can see that's the result of using the email annotation in the auth request class here, email and length here. Okay, let me test again with an email, correct email, but wrong password. Correct email, the email in the database nam@codejava.net here. Okay, and you see I got another response with HTTP status 401 unauthorized because the password is not correct. The password must be nam 2020 here. Okay, you see. Okay, let me try again. And this time I provide correct credential, correct email and password. Enter. And you see now I got the successful response status code HTTP 200. And you can see the body of the response is the JSON document with the field email and access token here. And you see I specify a fixed text here, dot access token here. Very cool, right? That means the authentication API is working, and we just need to update the code to generate the JWT access token and put the access token in the access token field of the JSON response here. Let me format JSON. Okay, you see the response is now look better. You see email and access token. Next, I'm going to show you how to code the .token UT class for generating an access token based on a user object. This method generate access token will be used by the Auth API upon successful authentication. As you can see here, if the authentication is successful, the API returns a response that includes the auth response object containing an access token. This is actually a JSON web token. Okay, come back to the project and code a new Java class. I create a new Java package here. net.code java.jwt. Okay, and new Java class here. JWT token UT, and use the component annotation for this class. And here we need to define a long constant for the expiration time of the token. Private static find a long expire duration is 24 hours. Okay, 24 multiplied by 60 minutes, 60 seconds, when 1000 milliseconds, 24 hours. Okay, and we'll also need to declare a secret key which will be used to digitally sign the token. Private string secret key, and we can use the value annotation to tell Spring Framework to inject the actual value from the application properties file. Okay, so we specify the property name here, app.jot.secret, and then we update the application.properties file here to specify the secret key which is used to sign the token. Okay, it can be any arbitrary string and numbers. Okay. Okay, and then the first method is public string generate access token. Parameter is the user object user. And to generate a JSON web token, we need to use the JWT library for Java. We already declared the dependency JWT here. Okay, then we use write the code like this: return JWTs from io.json web token package here, builder, and we set the subject of the token. Here I set the subject containing user ID and email. User get ID separated by a comma, and user get email. User get email, and then set the issuer name. For example, code Java, and set the issue time, which is the current date and time, a new date, and set the expiration time, set expiration, which is the current date, system.current time list, plus the value of expire duration here, plus expire duration. Okay, and then we sign the token with the cryptographic signature algorithm. Signature algorithm, sorry, algorithm is HS256 HS512 here. Okay, we should use a signature algorithm class from the package io.json web token here. Okay, and we specify the secret key here, secret key. Okay, and then there is the token in compact form. Okay, very simple. The code for generating an access token, JSON web token. Okay, and then update the Auth API class. Here we need to authorize the token UT class here. Token UT. Okay, and then for the access token here we call .util generate access token for the given user object. Very simple, right? Okay, so far so good. And now let's test the authentication API again. Okay, so I use the same command here to get the access token for the user name at codejava.net. Okay, you see I got the HTTP 200 success, and you can see the response JSON here. You see email and access token. You see, and to check this JSON web token, you can go to the website jot.io and choose algorithm H512 here and paste the encoded token. So I copy the encoded token. Sorry, copy the encoded token here in the access token field of the JSON response. Paste here. And you see the header of the token is specifies the algorithm HS512 and the payload containing the claims information here. Subject ID1, email name at codejava.net, issuer codejava, issuer time in seconds here, I think, and the expiration time here. And to verify the signature, you need to provide the secret key here. Let me copy the secret key here. Okay, and paste here. And you see signature verified. Okay, so this paste is very useful for checking, testing a JSON web token. Just paste the encoded token here, and you can see it decodes the header payload and also verify the signature. Let me test with another user. So I run the unit test to insert another user into the database. This time I specify the email is, for example, john@gmail.com, and the raw password is john123. Okay, and run this test. Okay, successful. And let me check in database. So I have the second user, John, here. And now let me test the authentication API. Okay, run this command and specify the email address john@gmail.com, and password is john123. Okay, successful. You can see in the JSON response the access token value here. You see email zone access token. Now let me copy the access token and check in the website in on the website here. Paste the encoded token here. You see the header, the payload data, subject ID2 zone at gmail.com, and verify the signature. Copy the secret key and paste here. You see signature verified. By design, the authentication API should be public, accessible to everyone, and the products API should be protected, accessible to only authenticated users. Okay, let me test the product API again here. Curve localhost 8080 slash products JSON. And you see, currently the API is public, accessible to everyone. I can use the API without authentication. You see, the response is a list of products here, and the same for the create a product API. So to secure the products API, to protect the products API, we need to update the application security config class here in the configure HTTP security method. Update the statement authorized request here. Specify and match for the URI slash auth slash login. This API should be public and should be accessible to everyone. So we call permit all. And for other request, any request authentication is required. Okay, and test again. Okay, now let me test this list product API again. And you see, I got the error HTTP status 403 forbidden access denied, meaning that the product API, this product API is protected. I need to be the client needs to be authenticated to use the API, and I want to convert all the error forbidden access denied error here with different HTTP status 401 unauthorized. So to do so, I can update the configure HTTP security method here. HTTP exception handling and authentication and checkpoint. And here I use a lambda expression like this. Request, response, and exception object in case of error in authentication. I send the HTTP status is 401 unauthorized here. Response send error. HTTP subject response SC unauthorized. Okay, yeah. And the error message. Sorry, it should be the second argument of the send error method. Okay, like this. Okay. And test the product API again. And you see now I got the status 401 unauthorized. And for the authentication API, I can log in, get an access token normally. Here you see access token. Next, you will learn how to implement JWT authentication for the protected API for the product APIs in our project. So in order to access, to use, to invoke the protected APIs, the client must send a request that includes the HTTP header, authorization bearer, and provide a JSON web token in the bearer here. And then the API verifies the token. If the token verified successfully, the API returns the response as if the client were authenticated. Else, if it fails to verify the token, return HTTP 401 unauthorized error. So in the project, we need to code a custom filter called JWT token filter and insert the filter in the middle of Spring Security filters chain like this. And in Java code, we need to code the JWT token filter class and then configure it in the application security config class. Okay, come back to the project. Okay, and let's create a new Java class here. JWT token filter. And we have this class extends the once per request filter class to ensure that the code in this filter will be executed only once per request. Add an implemented method. We write the code to verify the JSON web token in the do filter internal method here. For now, we just get the value of the HTTP header authorization like this. Request get header. The header name is authorization header and print out the value authorization header value. And for now, we just pass the request to the downstream filters. So we just call filter chain. You see the third parameter is a filter chain here. Filter chain, do filter. Okay. And we need to annotate this class using the component annotation. Okay, and then we update the application security config class here. We need to have an instance of the JWT token filter here. JWT token filter. JWT token filter. And we add the filter, that filter before the username password authentication filter here. HTTP add filter before and specify the filter JWT token filter, and we add this filter to be processed before the username password authentication filter here. Okay, let me check the error in the control here. Add filter before. Sorry, my mistake. I must declare the class is of type dot token filter. Okay, now the error should be gone. Okay, clear the console here, and now let me test the authentication API. Sorry, let me test the product API to see if the filter, this filter invoked or not. Okay, now clear the command prompt here. Okay, and call this API. And of course, I got the 401 unauthorized error. And let me check. Authorization header is now here. Okay, so far so good. That means the do filter internal method here got invoked. Let me update the command here to specify the header authorization colon bearer, and we should pass a token here. Localhost 8080 products. Okay, let me check. You see, it prints out the value of the authorization header, bearer, and token here. So based on this information, we can verify the JSON web token sent from the client. Make sense? And next, we need to update the token UT class, code the validate access token, and get subject methods, which will be used by the token filter class in order to verify a JSON web token sent from the client. Okay, so let's update the token UT class here. Okay. And code the second method here for validating a JSON web token. Public boolean validate access token. Parameter is a string representing a JSON web token, and return false by default here. Okay, and then we try catch this statement. JWT dot passes to pass the given string. Set signing key is the secret key here, and pass claims JWS here, passing the token. And if you see the pass claims JWS method here, you need to catch some exceptions. Here you see 1, 2, 3, 4 types of exceptions. Here, catch expire JWT exception. This exception is thrown in case the JSON web token is expire. And in the catch block, we simply log the error. So I declare a logger here. Find a logger from this package. Logger equal logger factory. Get logger and the class name. This class name dot token ut dot class. And in the catch block, just log the error. JWT expire and the exception object. Okay, and the second exception is illegal argument exception, which is thrown if the token is empty, null, or has only white space. Logger error. Token is null empty or has only white space. And the third exception we need to catch and we need to log is malform JWT exception. This exception is thrown if the JWT is invalid error. JWT is invalid. And the next exception we need to catch is unsupported JWT exception. This exception is thrown if the type of JSON Web Token is not supported by the current library. So we'll log the error here. JWT is not supported. And the last exception we need to log is signature exception. This exception is thrown if the signature in the JSON Web Token cannot be verified. Logger error. Signature validation failed. Okay. If no exception thrown, we return true after this statement, meaning that the token is verified successfully. And the next method is for getting the subject of a token. Public string get subject parameter is a token string. And just return an empty string for now. And we used a private method like this, private claims here. Pass claims from a given token, string token, and here return JWT parser. Set signing key is the secret key, and go pass claims JWT token and get body. And in the get subject method we return pass claims here token and get the subject of the token. Okay, so that's the update for the JToken class. Okay, and then we come to update the JToken filter class here. And we need to have a reference of JToken class here. Auto-wire private token ut. Okay, and we firstly we need to check if the request containing the header authorization or not. So we write a private method here, has authorization header. Parameter is request. Okay, return true by default. Okay, and then we get the header. Okay, and we check. We can use the object ut class here to check is empty of a string here header, or the header does not start with the text bearer. As you can see, we need to send the header authorization bearer and followed by JSON Web Token. So we also need to check if the header is not empty. We check if the header does not start with bearer. Header start with bearer here. Okay, so in this, if we return false, meaning that the request doesn't contain authorization header. So here in the do filter internal method, we check if has authorization header return false. Then we continue the filter chain and skip the rest of the code. Okay, and then we need to add the access token if the header does contain the authorization header. So we got another private method here. Get access token HTTP service request. Okay, we get the header authorization header here, and we are sure that the header contains the authorization bearer here. So we get the token equal header split because we send the token like this in the authorization header, the bearer and the token separated by a space. So we need to split using a white space here, and the token at the first index, which is at the second element. Sorry, we need to go chim here. Okay, and return the token. And now for early testing, we need to check the token first. Get access token request access token access token. Okay, and test. Okay, clear the console and test the API here. Okay, let me see. You see it prints access token, which is token here. Correct. Let me type something here. And you see it prints access token here. So we got the exactly value of the access token sent in the authorization header. Okay, so far so good. And then we need to validate the access token here. We call if .ut validate access token return false. Then we pass the request through the downstream filter and skip the rest of the code. So we copy this. Okay. That means if the code after this if gets executed, meaning that the access token is verified successfully, the code should set an authentication context as if the client were authenticated. So here we set authentication context, passing the access token and the request, and we need to code this method right below. Set authentication context, and firstly we need to get a user details object. User details equal get user details for a given access token, and code the method right below. Based on the access token, we extract the information of the user details such as ID and email in the subject of the token. So here we create a new user object, user details equal new user. Okay, and from the token we can get the subject using the JWT class here. Get subject for a given access token, and because in the token UT generate access token method, we set the subject, which is user ID and email, separated by a comma. So here we need to split using a comma here, and assign the return to an array. For example, subject array. Okay, and then we get the user ID and email. User details set ID integer passed in, which is subject array. The first element at 0 index is the user ID here, and at the 1 index is the email. So here we set user details, set email, subject array, and the element at the first index. Okay, then return the user details object. So here this code constructs user object based on the information in the JSON web token, user ID and email. Okay, so we got the user details object here. Then we need to use username authentication, username password authentication token here. Authentication equal new username password authentication token, and we need to pass the user details object, user details here, user details, and we need to pass now values for you can see we need to use this constructor that takes principal object, credentials and authorities. We just pass now values for credentials and authorities. Make sense? Okay, and then we set the details here for the authentication object. We need to create a new web authentication details source here, and build details for the given request. Okay, and then we call security context holder to set the authentication context for the request here. Get context, set authentication object here, authentication. So this code means that it set the authentication context as if the client were authenticated because the token is verified successfully. Make sense? Okay, and then okay, let's move this statement into the get token, access token here. Okay, and if everything is going fine after setting authentication context, we need to pass the request to the downstream filter. But this time it is different because the client is treated as authenticated. Make sense? Okay, so that's the code for the dot token filter. You see, we check if the request contains the authorization header, validate the access token, and set the authentication context. Okay, now we can test the protected APIs. Okay, let me try this one, and of course I get the unauthorized error. Okay, now I need to close the authentication API to get an access token. Okay, here for this user zone. Okay, you see I get an access token here. Okay, and I copy the access token here. Okay, and then I specify the access token in the header authorization bearer and paste the access token. Paste, enter, and you see I got the result is an array of products here, meaning that the request to the protected API is authenticated using a JSON Web Token. Very cool, right? Let me format the JSON output. You see, and let me test again. Modify the token here. So I should got an error. You see, I got the error for one unauthorized. And let me check in the console here. I got exception. You see, we got the signature exception. Dot signature does not match. Very cool, right? And let me test the create product API, which also requires authentication here. Okay, let me copy the access token again. Copy the access token again. Sorry, copy the correct one here. And paste in Notepad here. Okay, and then now let me test the create product API with authentication using JSON Web Token. Yeah. Okay. Here is it. If I just type this, we got an error. You see, 401 access denied, unauthorized here, because I need to be authenticated to use the create product API. So I need to specify the header, another header for authorization here, like this. I specify the first header is the authorization header, authorization bearer, and then followed by the JSON Web Token here. So I copy. Let me enter something wrong here, and you see I got unauthorized error. And let me see what is printed in the console. We got a malformed dot exception. You see. Okay, so far so good. Now let me enter the access token correctly. Before that, I enter another product name. Okay, for example, the product name is Amazon equal price 1, 2, 3. Okay, and provides access token in this authorization header. Copy and paste here. Okay, and hit enter. I still got the error. Okay, successful. I got the response status 201 created and you can see the response is a JSON document of the newly persisted product here. ID for name Amazon equal price 123. Very cool, very right. Okay, now we can check in database here in products table, and you see the new product Amazon equal got inserted here. It is the result of the API call to the protected API with authentication based on JSON Web Token. Alright, so far you have learned how to implement JWT authentication with Spring Security. I hope you found this video helpful. Please subscribe to my channel, like, comment, and share this video. Thanks for watching.